India has been consumed by the gender identity ideology with little to no resistance. This talk will list a series of dangerous developments that happened in this past year. For the live audience, as well as those who might watch this talk on YouTube later, I urge you to please check my FQT from November 2021 that leads up to the contents of my talk today. Another important webinar to follow up would be the India WDI webinar held on 23rd January 2022, around this time last year, where three young, brilliant feminists break down the following topics: gender identity and the relationship with misogynistic exploitative practices against women, stuck between the conservative lesbophobia and misogyny of the LGBT cult, and the institutional capture of gender identity ideology. A lot has happened with regards to erasure of women's rights in India, yet no mainstream media publication has approached the subject of gender ideology from a critical viewpoint. I have been documenting many legal, social implications of this ideology through my e-zine I founded in the beginning of last year, and I have since written more than 25 pieces exploring this topic from an exclusive Indian angle. There used to be a time when I used to be commissioned to write for Indian media houses, but ever since my political views have become public, they don't wish to platform me, and especially not when I speak against the gender overlord. In February, I wrote about how adoption rights in India were turning into a playground for gender ideologues. CARA, the Central Adoption Resource Authority, is a nodal body for adoption of Indian children and is mandated to regulate in-country and inter-country adoptions as the central authority of the Government of India. CARA states that a single female can adopt a child of any gender, but a single male shall not be eligible to adopt a girl child. For every potential adoption, a social worker is assigned to the case to run background checks, etc. At least in theory, this procedure is quite watertight. But despite laws, these mandates aren't always upheld, not to mention India's population and a corrupt government that turns a blind eye when cases slip through the cracks. In a recent case based on a petition by a trans couple, the court observed that a marriage certificate isn't a prerequisite for adopting a child, as some provisions allow even single parents to adopt. The sex of the child this trans couple wanted to adopt was not mentioned. Either way, it seems reckless to readily circumvent carefully thought out policies for the sake of inclusion of the so-called trans rights with no demarcated stipulations. Essentially, the lobby groups have managed to set legal precedents to trans adoption rights by enabling men to self-identify as women, thereby violating the rules laid out by CARA that males, in the absence of female partners, cannot adopt a girl child. Now, all a partnered man has to do is proclaim a feeling of womanhood and will receive a clean chit to adopt a child of either sex. We already have a very prominent TRA, an intact male, Gauri Savant, who believes, in quote, "You don't need to have a uterus to give birth to a baby," end quote. The Women and Child Development Ministry was allocated 252 billion rupees for the welfare of women and children. But can they define what a woman is? The Tamil Nadu Uniformed Services Recruitment Board was given a court order in March last year to create special reservation for trans people, and that their inclusion can't be clubbed under the female category. I was initially happy that female workplace quotas will no longer be infringed upon by males who self-identify as women. However, it was not about protecting female affirmative action quotas at all. Rather, this judgment was a result of a confusion around several pre-existing safeguarding measures for various groups, not just women. One of the media reports that announced the passing of this judgment said, in quotes, "The Madras High Court has held that clubbing transgender persons who self-identify as females under the quota for women is unconstitutional." Notice how transgender is a self-identified female, but a female is a woman. Without going into detail about the various issues with this judgment, let me point you towards three real-life implications of this order. The changes mentioned in this criteria is only applicable to males who self-ID as female and not the other way around. Shocking. In 2019, the Commissioner of Social Welfare told the Madras High Court that transgenders were entitled to reservation in jobs and education as per the caste-based community certificate, which if they provide, they can be eligible for such reservation. And those who do not possess community certificates could be considered as most backward class candidates. Transgender who prefer to identify themselves as females were eligible to compete under the 30% special quota for women candidates and also under the rest of the 70% meant for both men and women. In 2021, 3 men self-identifying as female applied to be a constable at the uniformed services. These 3 men couldn't apply for the job due to the upper age limit of 26. All of them were older. While the uniformed services has existing provision for destitute widows to seek employment due to the death of their husband, there is an age limit of 35. The TRAs behind the case that I mentioned above cited that the petitioner's upper age limit must be the same as that of the destitute widow, for after all, they are marginalized on the basis of their gender. The plea was allowed by the court and the 3 men took the aptitude test. Having taken the test and failed, these men wanted a much lower cutoff mark like that of a destitute widow. The 3 men scored 30, 32, and 35 respectively in their test against a required 38. The cutoff for the destitute widow category was 29. So they filed a petition with the court stating that they needed relaxation of cutoff marks because if the destitute woman gets it, they should too. In March 2022, Madras High Court made a strong recommendation to create special reservation for transgender candidates in future recruitments, in addition to extending other privileges. Inventing the transgender Indian child. UNAIDS, a UN program set up to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, along with an ad agency, launched a campaign called Unbox Me to, quote, sensitize larger communities on the rights of transgender children, end quote. They made a film as part of the campaign where a sweet young non-conforming boy is seen as not fitting in, and therefore he must be trans. This was in the lead up to the International Transgender Day of Visibility on March 31st. So one can assume to unbox a gender non-conforming child, according to the TRAs, is in fact put them into the correct gender box. A boy in a dress goes into the girl box. At least that's what the campaign implied. The egregious motive of this campaign and the kind of future they envision for Indian children as young as 2 has mortified me. The UNAIDS has based its entire campaign on a study by the Journal of Psychological Medicine, which claims that 31% of transgender persons in India end their life by committing suicide, of which 50% have attempted suicide at least once before their 20th birthday. Upon further scrutiny, I deduced that this study is but a gross misrepresentation of facts, and it is shockingly alarmist. It doesn't have a single legitimate source to confirm their claims. It is simply made with a propagandist viewpoint. Raising awareness amongst adults about AIDS with campaigns to normalize homosexuality, legalizing gay marriages, promotion of safe sex, etc., has taken a backseat. But the rigor with which huge intergovernmental bodies like the UN and swaths of fringe organizations all over the world are unanimously channeling their energy towards this phenomenon of trans kids is disconcerting. Maybe some of you remember that I talked about the TRA lobby producing a training manual for children which mentions puberty blockers, hormones, and surgical interventions as solutions for gender dysphoria. There is also a huge push for administering Lupron to children. Social media forums are filled with minors discussing which doctor to go to for it and how young they could be to get it. It is also concerning, but not surprising, that one of the authors of the training manual that I mentioned, a trans-identifying man by the name Vikramaditya Sahai, is himself heavily entrenched in a particular brand of pornography, the sissy porn. In his Instagram account, he posts pictures of himself completely naked and talks about gender and expression and fluidity, among other things. He's also a member of a subreddit called Indian Sissies, where he posts pictures of himself with the caption, "Still a slut." I have also written about a popular trans rights activist who glorifies pornography and writes articles claiming that porn told him that it was okay to be a girl. In 2018, at a university in Kerala, a trans-identified man participated in women's sports and in so doing, kicked a woman out of her rightful spot. Ria, aside from competing in the wrong category, also competed outside of his age group. Though authorities have specified an upper age limit of 25, the 28-year-old Ria competed and won. A recent judgment passed by the Kerala High Court allowed trans athletes to participate in the category of their own choice, with an added caveat in the absence of a separate category. This judgment came after a petition was filed by the trans-identifying man who goes by the name Anamika. The petition addresses his grievance at not being able to compete in the female category at the district level judo championships because that's a category that he felt matched his gender identity. The court has issued notices to the associations as well as the state authorities to implement the above order. The order is applicable not just to judo, but any sporting activities any trans-identifying male wishes to participate in. This caveat of a separate category seems like a lazy attempt at seeking fairness, according to me, as if there are enough trans athletes to compete against each other or a mixed category in judo exists. Judo, much like other combat sports, if made mixed, will not only favor male competitors, but violate the safety and privacy of female competitors. I had previously spoken about a trans-identified male who had petitioned to change the medical college syllabus as the concept of sex dimorphism in medical school textbooks triggered him. Several changes have now been implemented by the National Medical Commission, and one particularly stands out. Fetishism, voyeurism, sadism, masochism, exhibitionism, necrophilia will no longer be treated as sexual perversions. Instead, the modified syllabus will aim to discuss it in quotes in the context of informed consent during any sexual interaction. Sexual dimorphism will be replaced with several unscientific word salads such as demonstrate an understanding of the difference between sex and gender, demonstrate an understanding of transgender and gender nonconformity, demonstrate knowledge about basic tenets of LGBTQIA+ affirmative counseling. I reported on an organization trying to provide surgery grants for sex reassignment surgeries. According to their website, TARMS, or Trans Arms, is the charity foundation to help transgender people with monetary grants for surgeries across the globe through personal and corporate funding. In my report, I also referred to the Ayushman Bharat Transgender Health Insurance Scheme. Overseen by the Social Justice Ministry, the Ayushman Bharat Transgender Health Insurance provides 5 lakh rupees coverage for hormone replacement therapy, surgeries, and post-surgical care at government and empaneled private hospitals. Many states in India already provide free surgeries in government hospitals. Corporates too are offering insurance policies to trans and non-binary employees that cover a plethora of surgery and also provides considerable paid leave for recuperation. There is a long list of cases of abduction and forced castration in India, but the media reported an utterly tragic case of a minor who was abducted and forcibly castrated and operated on again in 2008 to regain his lost boyhood. It is not clear when the poor boy was castrated, but the media glorified how, in quote, modern science and a team of gifted doctors turned the eunuch into a boy again, end quote. In 2008, he was still a minor, so the legalities seem to have been overlooked. The report says the surgeons extracted sections of nerves from Chandrasekhar's arms and transplanted them to rebuild his genitals. The boy was coerced into prostitution by eunuchs. He was taken away on March 23, and a sex change operation was forced on him. He was brought back to Bangalore after the operation and confined to a house. He was forced to act like a girl and join the transgenders. He was warned that if he spoke out against them, he would be branded with a hot coin on his forehead and barred from joining the community, end quote. The doctor who is supposed to have operated on this minor is a 75-year-old doctor, Dr. Naganna, a surgical specialist at the government-run hospital. In 2013, reports of this doctor performing numerous surgeries on minor resulted in him being picked up and questioned by the police. Chennai police said Dr. Naganna used to perform at least 2 such surgeries every year and charge about rupees 5,000 as fee for each operation. He was arrested in 2013. There were at least 2 such cases reported in 2020 alone. With several national branches of WPATH burgeoning into the mainstream and organizations like UNAIDS openly promoting transing Indian children as young as 2, there's currently no future for Indian children where they aren't props for fetishistic, greedy, and depraved men. The crimes mentioned are merely dipping into the chasm because for every crime reported, hundreds go unnoticed or get buried under the ill-reputed Indian criminal justice system. An organization called Association of Transgender Health, ATI, has been founded by retired Dr. Sanjay Sharma. The organization also boasts a plastic surgeon, Dr. Richie Gupta, among its personnel. One of their projects, stealthily named IPATH, conducts an annual conference called IPATHCon. The third edition happened last October. Ati put out a guideline titled ISOC 1, much like the SOCs that WPATH provides, but with an Indian twist. Dr. Sharma, who is the chief editor of the guideline, is apparently a board member of WPATH himself. In the 247-page long guideline, the word gender appears 608 times, affirm 160 times, incongruence 132 times, detransition, as you know, 0 times. The Supreme Court announcement in the late 2022 allowed married women's forced pregnancy to be regarded as marital rape only for the purpose of abortion. Discussions around criminalizing marital rape itself is still under discussion, but for the purpose of abortion alone, the court has made an exception. The Supreme Court also made it clear that the marital status of a woman seeking abortion shouldn't be a basis for discrimination as long as it is within the 24-week legal ambit. The announcement is a re-evaluation of an Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, which limited the scope to married women, except in cases of rape or threat to mother's life, and it had only up to 20 weeks. Barely a few hours after the Supreme Court announcement was picked up by the media, the trans rights activists took offense to the one word describing the one demographic that rarely clinches a win: women. Several media outlets published long forms about the discrimination faced by queer, trans, and non-binary persons seeking health services. An article quoted Ray, a 42-year-old trans man. My identity is a bigger question mark than what my medical problem is. I physically look like a man, but haven't undergone a transition surgery. So I still have a uterus. So if there's a problem with my uterus, they don't know what to make of me. End quote. I wonder if Ray could simply state her sex, not assigned, but observed, rather than demand an entire medical profession to dance to Vogue tunes. In December last year, a queer lawyer, Rohin Bhatt, wrote a passionate appeal to the Chief Justice of India, requesting a small administrative direction to include preferred pronouns in court appearance slips. This additional section on the slip is to affirm the identities of queer lawyers and will also be reflected in court orders and judgments. Bhatt's letter draws from international courts where such inclusivity has been already established. He cites the Provincial Court of British Columbia, where preferred pronouns need to be recorded as per the procedure starting December 2020. Thank you, Canada. He feels the words used to describe people are essential for their gender identity and believes language tend to inflict symbolic violence on transgender litigants and lawyers in courts and lead to enhancing dysphoria, which can lead to further psychological distress. As a way to mitigate this violence, he finds obfuscating languages to be the best way forward. He does feel clarity and precision to be paramount in legal writing, and he misses his own statement's irony by asking the Chief Justice to be more affirming. His ambition with this small administrative direction extends beyond mere courtesy in court during a hearing, but wants the judgment to reflect the preferred pronouns of the lawyers and litigants alike, thereby letting this ideology waltz its way into the legal curriculum. He goes a step further and suggests that clerks have to be trained to use queer inclusive language and wants lawyers to submit briefs using the same muddled language. And he wants to, begin quote, eliminate the methods we were trained to use in law school, end quote. Essentially, this small request is demanding a complete overhaul of the entire legal system, which is very important to begin with. A 47-year-old trans-identified man was recently convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison for drugging and raping a woman in Bombay. He was also sentenced to an additional year under the Black Magic Act for performing certain rituals to cure the influence of an evil eye. The media coverage of it has been very interesting. The Times of India reports the incident with the following headline: Fake trans person gets 7 years jail for rape and black magic in Bombay. Hindustan Times writes, man gets a 7-year jail time for raping tutor posing as transgender. While the fakeness of this man's trans identity is subject to scrutiny in itself, it is rather hasty for a national news outlet to make such conclusions without investigating it further. While it is a comfort to the victim and the general public that the perpetrator has been duly convicted, it is rather confusing that the judge came to the conclusion that this was in fact not a transgender. In a rather bizarre statement, the judge said, Begin quote. In our society, people take blessings from transgender on several occasions like marriages, birth of child, etc. Therefore, it is very obvious that the victim kept faith in the accused who was pretending to be a transgender. But it is seen that the accused, by taking the benefit of faith of the woman, committed oral penetration with her. End quote. For those of you wondering about the blessings part of the statement, please check a WDI talk I gave on hijras. It is considered to be a custom during marriages, but in many cases, these men have been obnoxious and have sought revenge if the families don't pay up for their service. In any case, firstly, a person has to be male to be called transgender woman. For the judge to rule that the convict was pretending to be a transgender makes me wonder if he thinks a man can pretend to be a man pretending to be a woman. I also wonder if the legal system is oblivious to the dangers of self-ID, gleefully permitting men to self-declare as female with no surgery requirements. And finally, how exactly can one know whether or not a person is transgender, especially when they proclaim trans women or women deal with it? Why is the judge not accused of transphobia? Where are the trans rights activists? Where is the social media uproar? Or is it maybe only resort to disparage feminists like me for stating material reality? Finally, some rapid fire changes in conclusion. Delhi High Court has passed a judgment that surgery is not required to change sex markers in passports. Men self-identifying as women can ask to be housed in prisons suiting their gender identity. 2 men self-identified as India's first trans lesbian couple, and the media glorified it as a path-breaking news. Meanwhile, lesbians are hung in public view or raped by family members to cure them. Surrogacy, prostitution, and other exploitative practices are being pushed even further in the name of inclusion. In summary, I close with this. Words have meaning, and feelings don't warrant any license to alter them. Men can't ever be women. No amount of nationwide gaslighting propaganda can alter that reality, and despite all attempts to silence my voice, I will keep speaking up. When the condition of women in this country is so fatal, what the trans lobby is attempting to do is yet another form of female erasure. What's clear as day is this. First, they abuse women. Then they claim to ally with women. Now they want to become women. This is a telltale sign of a dystopian world where a woman is but a garb for men to tear apart and adorn as a facade. Thank you. If I may, there was one more question from Melissa. Is there an overlap between activists pro-prostitution and pro-trans and pro-surrogacy/adoption as there is some other places, in some other places? So there is definitely an overlap between pro-prostitution groups and the trans ideology because the number of males that solicit in the country has gone up. They are the ones who you can actually see. Actually, from my house, about 500 meters down the road, you can actually see these men wearing women's clothes with garish makeup, soliciting men, and they go down a little dark alley, and men get blowjobs from these men. Because they do that, and their livelihood depends on prostitution and providing this sort of a money to their teacher or their guru or in the trans community. They end up having to do this over and over again, and because they are doing it and because it's their livelihood, they have kind of owned prostitution as a profession in a way that they are not letting women to talk about abolition or not letting women to talk about exit. The same with surrogacy. Whenever you talk about surrogacy, whenever you talk about adoption, the first thing the media talks about is, but what about the LGBT community, even though it has got absolutely nothing to do with them. No single media publication is talking about how this is an exploitative practice for the female sex class. Not a single one. It is astonishing how incredibly tone deaf every news article that comes out about surrogacy or adoption or anything, prostitution or pornography, for example. Everything is about choice. Everything is about let the woman choose what she wants to do. It is economically empowering her. Therefore, you must not stand in the way of her, of the number of houses that she can build and things like that. Sorry, that was the answer to that question.
I've got a question for you, Vaishnavi. Why do you think there's so little resistance in India? Why are the because there is resistance to all of this in Germany, like quite a lot now, Britain and the States and lots of the countries of women here. But why is it in India that it's so difficult for women and I suppose our ally men to speak out?
But they are speaking up in small corners of social media or something like that, but it is just not possible for us to organize as a movement against gender ideology, because India is just a massive country, and we do not, only the English-speaking people can converge with a common language and approach this phenomenon. Like, for example, through India WDI, we've written letters to many organizations asking them to revoke, say, introducing puberty blockers to children, or we've written to certain concerned departments asking to cancel the petition which requires colleges to have same-sex hostels. And recently we've written a letter, a really long letter, to the Chief Justice of India, asking him to bear in mind the implications of all these laws that they're just so gleefully passing, the implications of it in the women's sex-based rights and things like that. This can only be understood by people who understand English, and they need to know what WDI India is. There is very little, it's a bubble, it's a very tiny bubble. Women from other WDI know about India WDI. For a country with 1.4 billion people, 100 people have signed the declaration. That must say something to you.